The Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on H.R. 1964, Rep. G.K. Butterfield, to provide for the recognition of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina and for other purposes. We call it the Lumbee Recognition Act. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record. They're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that Representative G.K. Butterfield and Representative Dan Bishop from North Carolina, both from North Carolina, be allowed to join us on the dais. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Good morning, and thank you to our witnesses for being here to testify. I also want to recognize and welcome all tribal members in the audience today. Today, we examine H.R. 1964, the Lumbee Recognition Act, introduced by our colleague from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield. H.R. 1964 will extend federal recognition to the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. Federal recognition is the formal establishment of a government-to-government relationship between the United States and a tribal nation. Its importance to tribes cannot be overstated. Official recognition allows a tribe to establish a homeland, to take that land to trust, to protect it for future generations. This, in turn, allows all the tribes to manage its own resources and gives them control over local jurisdiction and taxation issues. Recognition also entitles tribal people to distinctive benefits, including eligibility to participate in any federal programs, including for health care and education. In other words, recognition is necessary for a tribe to fully exercise its sovereignty and to protect health, safety, and welfare of its members. That is why enactment of this legislation is so vital to the Lumbee people. The Lumbee tribe resides primarily in Robson, Hoke, Cumberland, and Scotland counties in North Carolina. Is it Robeson or Robson? Robeson, knew it. Robson, all right, good. With approximately 60,000 members. It is the largest tribe in North Carolina, the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River, and the 9th largest tribe in the nation. In 1885, the Lumbee tribe was recognized by the state of North Carolina. The tribe then sought federal recognition from the United States in 1889 and have been seeking it ever since. Over the past 130 years, numerous bills have been introduced to Congress to federally recognize the Lumbee tribe, resulting in a record of hearing transcripts and committee reports. In addition, numerous studies have been undertaken in academia on Lumbee ancestry, and reports have been requested and filed by the Department of Interior on the tribe's validity. All of these documents consistently conclude one thing: the Lumbee people are indeed a distinct, self-governing Indian community that has been continuously and undeniably present in the Robeson County area. So why are they still not federally recognized? Historically, the Department of Interior was often opposed to the federal recognition for the Lumbee. However, this opposition was not based on questions related to the tribe's Indian ancestry or governmental status, but rather on the cost of providing services to the tribe due to the size of its population. Though that attitude has prevailed at times throughout our history, I hope we can agree today that it's unconscionable to deny a tribe its right to sovereignty based upon its size or cost. In 1955, the Lumbee tribe once again sought federal recognition. Unfortunately, this was during what is known as a termination era, when the U.S. government sought to terminate relationships with tribal governments and forced assimilation of indigenous people into the mainstream American society, so-called mainstream American society. To that end, the Department of Interior recommended that Congress amend the Lumbee recognition legislation to deny eligibility for the benefits and services available to the tribe recognized under the bill. Congress then enacted this amended legislation in 1956, effectively simultaneously recognizing and terminating the Lumbee tribe. Only Congress could do something that dumb. Later, in 1987, the Lumbee tribe attempted to restore their recognition through the newly created federal acknowledged process at Interior. However, the department informed the tribe that it was ineligible to participate in that process because Congress itself had terminated its relationship with the tribe in the 1956 Act. Therefore, they said only Congress could restore that relationship. While I do believe that the federal acknowledgement process at Interior is an important avenue for tribal recognition, it is not the only one. As we have established in previous hearings, Congress absolutely has the authority to federally recognize tribes. Other tribes that were terminated by congressional action have come before Congress and had their relationship reestablished through legislation. The Lumbee should not be treated any differently. I want to thank Representative Butterfield, along with Representative Hudson, for championing this bipartisan legislation and enter the record the joint statement of support. I also want to thank representatives from North Carolina, Governor Roy Cooper's office, as well as Executive Director of the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs for attending today, and I submit their statements in support of the Lumbee recognition for the record. I look forward to hearing testimony from our witnesses, and I will now recognize Ranking Member for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, once again, one of these sticky issues, and it's something that troubles me. This has been around a long time, 1956, almost as...
65.
This is not a math quiz here, almost as old as me, not quite. The point is that it's troubling to me because here we go again, having tribe against tribe. And I'm a little bit upset. I'm more than a little upset at the Department of Interior, the BIA, for not adjudicating this issue and ruling on it and kicking the ball down to Congress, where it's not as easy as it sounds, because as everybody knows, then whether it's going to go on to the Senate and what's going to happen there. And so I'm in a dilemma. I'm a great supporter of the Indian nations and indigenous people. And I just hate to see it when we get in these political dogfights. Because I think when the tribes are unified, there's a lot of things we can get done. And there was another hearing, and of course, I have to compliment Denny Heck for mentioning my support, and our distinguished person from New Mexico on what we're trying to do, correct some injustices in the past with that. Not only that massacre that occurred in the Dakotas, but also the awarding of the nation's highest honor. So, interested in the hearing. It's, I don't know what's going to happen. I ironically enough, full disclosure, I had a conversation on the floor with Tom Cole, and we were talking about this. We kind of both, I'm not trying to blame the Department of Interior or the BIA, but God, this has been hanging around for a long while, and when they should have done their job and ruled on that. So here we are again today, trying to go back at it again. So I'm interested in the hearing. I'm glad you have witnesses and obviously elected officials from the state that's involved in. We have had our battles in California. As you know, we have quite a few tribes. Sometimes it's about gaming, sometimes it's not. But looking forward to hearing what the witnesses have to say. But I've got kind of a chip on my shoulder against Interior and the BIA right now. And maybe this will illuminate some of these issues, why this has been allowed to fester for so many years. And maybe this is a way that we have to go through so we do avoid this tribe against tribe and Indian against Indian. That's something that's been used historically in American history, and I just don't like it. So thank you very much. I want to thank the witnesses for being here and look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now invite the panel witnesses to take their places, which you already done. Thank you very much. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. When you begin, the lights on the witness table will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I will ask you to please wrap up your statement. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Harvey Godwin, Chairman of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina.
Thank you, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Harvey Godwin Jr., and I'm the elected chairman of the Lumbee Tribe. On behalf of my people, thank you for this hearing on the Lumbee Recognition Act and for allowing me to testify today. We appreciate the courageous work of our champion representatives Butterfield and Hudson and other members of the North Carolina delegation who have co-sponsored our bill, including Representatives Dan Bishop, David Price, and Alma Adams. We are grateful as well for the support of the great governor and Honorable Roy Cooper of North Carolina and the North Carolina Indian Commission, which is represented by Executive Director Greg Richardson, who is here in this audience today to support us. We are supported by both of our North Carolina senators, Richard Burr and Tom Tillis. Senator Burr has written a strong opinion editorial about why congressional action to extend full government-to-government relationship to the Lumbee Tribe is critical. We are honored to have such strong bipartisan support from our home state. We also thank Representative Don Young and Betty McCollum for their sponsorship of our legislation and for their longtime support of our tribe. The Lumbee people are thankful for the support of other tribal nations and organizations, including several members of the United Eastern and South Tribes, or USET, for their courageous support of H.R. 1964 and the Baltimore American Indian Center. Mr. Chairman, if you would allow me, I would like to offer letters of support and resolution to be put into the record. In the audience with me today are several Lumbee Tribal Council members, several of our Lumbee ministers, and immediately behind me, representatives of the Lumbee Warriors Association, all of whom honorably served the United States military. I will ask you to allow me now to ask these individuals to stand, the Lumbee Warriors, and all veterans in the audience, and be recognized. Mr. Chairman, I am the great-grandson of Quinn Godwin and the great-great-grandson of William Corville Jacobs, both original petitioners in 1885 for full fair recognition for Lumbee recognition. 131 years later, I'm the 19th Lumbee tribal leader to come before Congress for justice and equal treatment. And I hope that my children and my grandchildren won't be here in the future doing the same thing that I'm doing today. As mentioned before, our tribe is located in rural southeastern North Carolina, Robeson, Hoke, Scotland, and Cumberland counties. In 1887, a normal school was created in Pembroke, North Carolina, for our people to teach ourselves to be teachers. And today, that same institution is University of North Carolina at Pembroke. The Lumbee Tribe Culture Center is where we have all our cultural observations, and it is welcomed for our youth and for our elders and people and our members who have substitute opioid abuse. Our cultural influence is regional and state and nationally wide. War Paint, our host drum for the 2018 powwow at the Eastern Bound Cherokee, it was an honor for them to be there, and it was an honor for us to have them there. We have very successful programs of managing NAHASDA housing funds, our HUD Dash program that puts homeless vets, Lumbee vets in houses is one of the most successful in the country. We have our energy program, our Boys and Girls Club, where we have 7 Boys and Girls Clubs with 600 youth every single day, teaching them about our culture, helping them to do better in school, tutoring them, and mentoring them by professional people who come in and as mentors to help them every single day. Our people are elected officials, state and local, entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, ministers, teachers, and farmers, and many other professions. As stated before, this legislation has been before this Congress in 1888 and in 1956. Both were terminated because it was stated that we're just too large. This delay has harmed my people, and our elders each Sunday testify in church. When will we have full federal recognition, and when will we be recognized in my lifetime? Our youth have inadequate schools and health care, and they're still looking for the same thing. Our vets who serve our great nation every single year since 1888 in every conflict are come home to a second-class tribe that's recognized as a second-class tribe because of the lack of full federal recognition and defending the very government that has us labeled as second class. H.R. 1964, the 13th bill before the House over 100 years, it's time to establish fair and just treatment of the Lumbee people. We have full faith in this subcommittee that you'll do the right thing and for once and for all, recognize us and cause our people to have a fair place on the playing field of fairly recognized tribes in America and correcting this historical injustice. Thank you for your time today, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Dr. Frederick Hoxie, Professor Emeritus at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 1964, a bill to extend full federal recognition to the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. I do not appear before you today as an expert in Lumbee history, but as a veteran historian who has taught and written about federal Indian law and policy for more than 4 decades, and who, through that activity, has had the opportunity to work with and consult for a number of tribal nations, government agencies, and cultural institutions. Among these are the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, the Justice Department, the U.S. Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and the Smithsonian Institution. I retired in 2016 from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I was Swanland Professor of History, Law, and American Indian Studies. That wordy academic title underscores the breadth of my background and experience. Over the past 40 years, I've taught hundreds of undergraduates, law students, and graduate students in history, anthropology, and Native American studies, while publishing a dozen books on Native history and serving as a consultant to several government agencies, as well as tribes engaged in litigation over issues of jurisdiction and treaty interpretation. In 1990, the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution appointed me a founding trustee of the National Museum of American Indian, an institution that existed only on paper when I signed up. In 2013, I was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. I come here this afternoon to ask you to consider 3 important aspects of the decision before you with regard to this legislation. First, I want to explain the importance and significance of extending federal recognition to the Lumbee tribe. When Congress approves the Lumbee Recognition Act of 2019, it will finally place relations between this tribe and the United States on a firm and fair footing. That's admirable and important and long overdue. But that's only part of the story. By approving H.R. 1964, Congress will also be fulfilling once again its unique responsibility as the architect of the modern legal edifice that reconciles Native tribes in American democracy. Second, I want to underscore the significance of the written case the Lumbees have developed in their campaign to secure federal recognition, a case that conforms to the scholarly literature on the tribe and which is beyond dispute in the academic community. And third, I want to place the decision to recognize the Lumbee tribe in the broader context of recent federal Indian policy, a policy, I might add, that represents an island of bipartisanship in a contentious political world. I'll try to just underscore these points very briefly for you. First of all, the congressional responsibility is something that was brought before you by President George Washington in the very first session of Congress. He pointed out that the Constitution, while it mentions Indians and indicates that Congress has the right to regulate trade and so on, says very little about the details of how the United States would legally relate itself to Indian people. And he proposed that treaties be signed and ratified, and he proposed that federal legislation be enacted to govern relations between tribes and the United States. And that injunction was received by the Congress, and they acted very dramatically in those first years and established this legal framework. And what's so significant about this, I think, is despite the fact that there are obviously have been places where the American government has fallen short, we have actually established this legal relationship between tribes and the United States in a way that is really remarkable and is one of our shining examples, I think, of our political culture in the United States. Secondly, I want to just mention that the The scholarship that Dr. Campisi has summarized and which is being submitted as part of this testimony is unquestioned and is clear that the Lumbee people have existed continuously in this community for more than 200 years. And finally, I just want to point out, termination has been mentioned here, and I just want to point out that one of the really remarkable events in the past generation was a statement issued by President Nixon in 1970 in which he said termination was wrong, and that what we should do instead of focusing on whether to help tribes, we should focus on how to help tribes. And he launched a program of self-determination and a program of government-to-government relationships between the United States and tribes. And what's remarkable to me about that is that that has really underlay federal policy for the last almost 50 years, that there has been general recognition of that, in the importance of a government-to-government relationship between tribes and the United States. And this bill obviously offers you an opportunity to extend that policy to the Lumbees. After 1970, tribes would no longer be viewed as inconvenient anachronisms, but would become active partners in the administration of federal policy. And it's remarkable that despite political differences, that consensus view has continued. Tribes are essential institutions in Indian education, healthcare, economic development, social welfare, and resource management. As Nixon predicted, federal agencies no longer debate whether to work in partnership with tribes, but how to do so. Lumbee recognition should be understood in this broad historical context. The Lumbee tribe seeks to link itself to the United States through the settled principles of law and mutual respect that George Washington and our founders laid out. The historical record provides justification for this linkage that is both persuasive and widely accepted within the academic community. And despite the deep political divisions of our time, effective tribal governments are universally recognized as the key to the implementation of federal policy and the future of indigenous peoples within the United States. This context makes a compelling case for the positive action on H.R. 1964. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Richard Sneed, the Principal Chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Sneed, Principal Chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Chairman Gallego, Leader Cook, members of the Indigenous Peoples of the United States Subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today to provide the views of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians on H.R. 1964, the Lumbee Recognition Act. The Eastern Band opposes this bill. And you may wonder why the Eastern Band and the 30-member United South and Eastern Tribes USET care enough about this bill to express our opposition. We are Cherokee not because we woke up one day and decided to be. We're Cherokee because we always have been from time immemorial. As the elected leader of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, I represent a nation of citizens who are the direct descendants of those who survived one of the most calculated genocides in the history of mankind, the Trail of Tears. When a group of people falsely claim our identity, whether it's to gain fame, financial gain, or federal recognition, it is our duty and responsibility to defend the identity of our grandmothers and grandfathers who fought hard to preserve. The Lumbee have falsely claimed to be Cherokee several times over the last 100 years. To be sure, the Lumbees have appropriated the identities of various established tribes in attempts to achieve federal recognition. They have claimed to be Cherokee, Tuscarora, Chiraw, Siouan, which is not a historical tribe but a language family, and even the mythical Croatan tribe. The Lumbees have cloaked themselves in these tribal identities in a century-long quest for federal recognition as an Indian tribe. Even since the last Congress, the Lumbees have changed again from identifying themselves as the Lumbee tribe of Chiraw Indians to the more general Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. Congress should not reward this identity shopping with federal recognition and should not sanction the appropriation of Cherokee history, culture, and sovereignty. Second, based on third-party experts in Lumbee genealogy, we believe that most Lumbees today cannot demonstrate any Native ancestry at all. In fact, this bill seeks to prevent the Secretary of the Interior from conducting a complete, substantive review of the Native ancestry of the persons who comprise the Lumbee today. The, quote, tribal role provision in the bill specifically prohibits the Department of the Interior from reviewing relevant genealogical information and limits the Secretary to, quote, confirming compliance with the membership criteria set out in the Constitution of the tribe adopted November 16, 2001, end quote. To allow the Lumbee to avoid independent expert review of their members' claims of Native American ancestry through an evaluation of these base roles would undermine the integrity of all federally recognized tribal nations. Third, the integrity of the Eastern Band and other tribes with living tribal languages and long-standing government-to-government relations with the United States is undermined when politics and emotion, rather than the facts about tribal identity, dictate outcomes regarding federal recognition. As Eastern Band Cherokee leaders have stated since at least 1910, when the Lumbees first claimed to be Cherokee, the historical record raises very serious questions about the tribal and individual Native identity of the Lumbees. The Department of the Interior's Office of Federal Acknowledgement is the only federal entity equipped to make an informed, merits-based determination of Lumbee tribal identity and recognition. The Lumbees filed a petition to begin this administrative process, and the process is open for them to complete. They should not be permitted to circumvent it. After years of claims that the process is unfair and biased, the Obama administration issued new regulations that substantially lower the standards and information necessary to achieve federal acknowledgement. Former Solicitor Hillary Tompkins issued an M opinion that opened the door for the Lumbees to access the administrative process, and Congress should defer to that process. While we oppose congressional recognition of the Lumbees as a tribe, we support the Lumbees having a fair chance at federal recognition through the OFA administrative process. Finally, Congress should be absolutely certain that the Lumbee group meets the objective criteria at Interior before it enacts a bill that could cost up to $1 billion of taxpayer funds and significantly decrease the existing funds tribes receive. Even though the Lumbees are not federally recognized as a tribe, and the identity of the Lumbees as an actual sovereign nation is uncertain, HUD has already awarded the Lumbees $14.7 million in Indian Housing Block Grant funding for fiscal year 2019, more than the Hopi tribe and White Mountain Apache tribe combined, more than all 19 pueblos in New Mexico combined, and more than the Oglala Sioux tribe. The Congress should not authorize a similar hit to the Indian Health Service and Bureau of Indian Affairs budget without absolute certainty as to whether the Lumbee are an actual tribal nation or merely a group of individuals claiming to be Indian. Based on these facts, Congress cannot be confident in the merits of this bill. We urge this subcommittee and the House of Representatives to reject this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank all witnesses for the testimonies, reminding the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chairman will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Chairman Godwin, can you briefly outline a timeline of your community's journey through this process?
This process has been, as we said before, for full federal recognition began in 1885. Our people have been recognized on the East Coast and the Southeast of North Carolina way before that. So the process began in 1885. It was brought before Congress in 1888. It was rejected. And then in the 1930s, there were also bills that were presented. They were rejected as well. Even Congress and the Department of Interior sent people down to perform pseudoscience and measure our heads and other sorts of procedures to determine if we're Indian or if we look Indian. We've been through that process. Then in the 50s, we had these names before, but those were names that were aligned to us by state government or even the federal government. The name that the Lumbee chose was Lumbee, and that was in 1956. And that's the name that they've chosen since then. So in 1956, multiple bills were passed or pursued in the 1980s into the 2009 time frame and up until today. As a matter of fact, I gave testimony before this committee 2 years ago, September 2017.
Can you explain to everybody, what does it mean to be half in and half out of the federal trust relationship? How does that look like, and how does that affect your status, as well as how does it affect the day-to-day life of a Lumbee?
Yes, sir, that would be a good question for any of our youth that are attempting to go to college, and many of our youth do, and it's a struggle for them. Many of them have extreme student debt because they're half in and half out. They don't have the educational opportunities or the money from full federal recognition or to compete for scholarships that are only aligned for fully federally recognized tribes. So they're not bona fide American Indians due to those types of laws that that we're not qualified for at this time. So, and then once they do get on campus, then they got to explain to people, well, what is Lumbee? You're not fully federally recognized by other, sometimes other Indian students, but by students in general. What is the Lumbee? So then you have to explain what your identity is, and that is frustrating for a lot of our youth. Also, our elders who have been through this for generations and years, and generations before them and years now, and they're looking into the next 7 generations. This half in, half out means that, yes, you're Indian. You're Indian by name. Congress said you were. The state's been since 1885. We're doing great things for our people. We're developing programs on our own, by our own persistence. But you're half in because you're recognized by name, but you don't have appropriations. So even for our
Chairman, thank
veterans.
you. I want to make sure I get a couple other questions in before my time's out. Dr. Hoaxie, the major criteria for federal tribal recognition enumerated in regulations includes the following: a distinct historical community identifies American Indian that's existed since before 1900, a demonstrated political influence over the community, membership criteria for the community, and membership consisting of individuals descended from a historical Indian tribe who are not members of another tribe. In your testimony, and Dr. Campese's testimony, which you attached to yours, you argue that Lumbee meet or exceed these criteria for recognition. Has the historical, genealogical, and other evidence used by yourself and Dr. Campese to come to this conclusion ever been factually disputed by anyone? Based on this evidence, the law, and your experience as both an academic and a consultant for federal entities, do you believe that the Lumbee tribe presents a strong case for full federal recognition?
I do.
In your testimony, you state that the broader academic community also supports the Lumbee tribe in its petition for full federal recognition. As a professor emeritus, can you elaborate on this support? How does this academic community generally feel about the Lumbee tribe's extremely lengthy federal recognition process?
I think the academic community probably feels as frustrated as the Lumbees do, or at least in some similar way, in the sense that the opposition imposes a kind of anachronistic view of tribal identity and tribal culture. And the academic community is much more aware of the complexities and nuances in the tremendous variety of tribal histories across the United States and the different experiences different groups have had.
Thank you, Professor. I yield back my time to Ranking Member.
Professor, since we're talking about this, you didn't bring, by chance, bibliography. You've stimulated my interest on this, on articles that have been published on the history of the 2 tribes here. I actually do read a lot of this stuff, and at one time, I was a historian, believe it or not. I know that's hard to believe, but
Wonderful.
do you have a bibliography? Because I'm having trouble tracing the background of a tribe belonging in this and that, which I think would, aside from the law, I'm trying to get the background, just as the Trail of Tears and everything else.
I'm sure we could provide you with that. I don't have one with me, of course.
Okay, and the reason why I'm interested in that is, I've always been sensitive to the issue of the tribes because of the history and the terrible results of it, and it's perhaps one of the worst things that ever happened in American history, and boy, there's been a lot of it. And sometimes we talk about the great things and everything like that, but there's just a lot of bad things that hurt a lot of people, and most the indigenous peoples and the tribes. So that's why I'm so sensitive to it. On this, as I said, I heard this, and my biggest complaint right now is that no one has addressed this issue for so long. I think we had a hearing, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 years ago on this same subject here. This issue has come up before, and it really disturbs me, in the sense that I feel like I'm Solomon that has to make a decision on splitting the baby here, and I'm not wise enough or what have you, and that's why because either way, it seems one tribe is obviously not going to be happy about this because of past histories, and it just really, really hurts when we're trying to, most of us, all of us, I think, on this committee are sensitive to tribe fighting tribe, because this has been something that, let's face it, people in America have used for years, and I just don't like it. Anyway, well, once again, do you have any explanation why this is, whoever wants to jump in on this, why this was not adjudicated or at least spelled out in terms of policy? It's like, here we go again on this thing here. And I look towards the Department of Interior and say, hey, do your job on this one way or the other. Any comments?
With all due respect, sir, I think that the admonition of George Washington is the one that's before us. That is, it's Congress's obligation to act in this arena. It is for Congress to establish a political relationship with a Native American group in North Carolina. It is indisputable that they are there, they have been there for centuries, and that they have been a part of this process, and that they're asking to be brought into this legal structure that it is the Congress's responsibility to establish, to create government-to-government relationships between Native tribes in the United States.
Well, Professor, I'm not going to argue with you, but you know, Congress doesn't have if you're going to go back to Washington's time, and Congress didn't do a very good job helping out with the Trail of Tears and the number of people that died as a result of that. And we can go on to the Polk administration, where basically you started a war in many ways that was to extend slavery in this area that wasn't even land of the United States. They grabbed it from a different country. Yes, sir.
Sir,
I don't have much time, but go ahead.
thank you, sir. I'd like to respond. You know, I certainly don't disagree that Congress had a responsibility as far as establishing trust relationships through treaties, which has happened with, you know, hundreds of tribes. The issue before us now is that since 1978, there's an administrative process in place that ensures the integrity of those groups who claim Native identity. Currently, there are no fewer than 9 groups who claim to be Cherokee throughout the Southeast, who are either state recognized, seeking state recognition, and almost all seeking federal recognition. The process at OFA ensures the integrity of things. It removes politics from it. The criteria is there, the door is open, and we welcome any group who can go through the process. But for the 573 tribes who are federally recognized, that process ensures the integrity and protects the sovereignty of those tribes who have been recognized.
Thank you, sir. My time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. And I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Chairman Goodwin, what has been the Department of the Interior's historical justification for denying the Lumbee full federal recognition? And there's 2 side questions. Has this justification changed at all over the decades? And did the Lumbee Act of 1956 alter this justification?
The justification from the Department of Interior has been that our tribe is too large and they can't handle that amount of work. The Pamunkey tribe went through 20 years. They have several hundred members, went through that acknowledgement process, and it took them 20 years, and we have 60,000 members. So that's always been, you just got too many members. And to that point, I mean, Congress has recognized 23 tribes since 1976, and OFA's recognized 18, so Congress has been recognizing tribes for the last 40 years and been doing it quite a bit. So, but that's the answer I can give you for that, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And one last question, Chairman Goodwin. In your testimony, you referenced the termination era. Can you explain in more detail? And you know, we only have 5 minutes for this question period. Can you explain in more detail what the termination era is and how this time period impacted the Lumbee tribe's federal recognition?
There were, during the termination era, during the Eisenhower administration, they were trying to get out of the business of recognizing tribes as government-to-government relationships. During that time, when we filed for full federal recognition, there were other tribes that filed as well. And there were 6 tribes, and we're the only one left standing that hasn't been recognized, fully recognized, that were put in the same half-in, half-out situation from that termination era.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
And Dr. Hoaxie, in your testimony, you provided detailed historical context of the federal government's efforts to terminate its trust responsibility to numerous tribes, including Lumbee, Menominees of Wisconsin, and the Klamath in Oregon. Why is this historical context important to understand the Lumbee Recognition Act and Congress's role today?
The reason it's important is that, first of all, that the Lumbee were caught up in this movement of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, where members of Congress said, we're getting out of the Indian business, and they were actively moving to try to sever their relationships with tribes. Tribes objected. This was one of the issues that brought tribes together, recognized and non-recognized tribes in the 50s and 60s, and led to unprecedented levels of Native protest. And as a consequence of that, that tribal protest and political changes in the Congress brought about the Nixon statement in 1970 and a turn towards self-determination and government-to-government relationships, which was at that time a explicit rebuke of termination and a turn towards a new policy which continues really to undergird what we do today.
Thank you, Dr. Hoaxie. And how long have you been researching and studying Indian history?
For 40 years.
Thank you.
I hate to think that many, but there it is.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hoaxie. Thank you for your dedication. And Chief Sneed, in your testimony, you stated that the Interior is the only federal entity equipped to determine tribes' federal recognition and not Congress. However, the U.S. Constitution does establish congressional authority under the Commerce Clause and Treaty Clause. Will you please explain why you don't believe Congress has authority to determine tribal recognition?
Well, it's not that I don't believe that Congress has the authority. Clearly, the authority is there. What I point to is the administrative process to ensure the integrity of those petitioning meet the criteria, because it undermines the tribal sovereignty of all federally recognized tribes. And to the point that we're here today, and as I mentioned in my first response, there are no fewer than 9 groups right now who claim to be Cherokee. It should not be left to tribes to have to come before Congress and before committees to defend who we are as a people when there is a process in place with experts, genealogists, and so forth who can vet out all of that information.
Thank you so much, Chief Sneed, and thank you all so much for taking the time to be here today.
We now recognize Chairman Grijalva for five minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate it and associate myself with your comments at the beginning of the meeting in terms of the importance of federal recognition, what it means to a tribe, and the consequences of not having that recognition and living in that limbo two-world issue that the chairman brought up, and that that Congress does have and has exercised in the past the power to recognize. And I just want to bring up some points, if I may, Mr. Chairman, about throughout this whole issue, there's been some things that have been brought up in opposition to the recognition of the Lumbee tribe. It's been claimed that the Lumbee cannot be a real tribe because it is based on a geographic feature, the river. And that's no different from dozens of other federally recognized tribes, including 2 in Arizona, that have been recognized, the Gila River community and the Colorado River Indian tribes, which are both bear these modern names as a consequence of their geographic location. We also heard that Lumbee cannot be a real tribe because it descended from multiple tribal groups. And that has nothing to do with the ability to be federally recognized. The Indian Reorganization Act allows any group of Native Americans who are living together, regardless of historical tribal affiliation, to adopt a constitution, organize a tribal government, and thereby becoming federally recognized. Again, that is not a reason not to. And finally, we've heard that Lumbee should go through the Department of Interior's Part 83 process and instead of coming to Congress for recognition. Chairman Godwin, can you explain to the committee why this process, Part 83, is not a viable option for your community? Then I have one more question after that, if I may. Sir?
As I've stated before, we've been through this journey for 131 years, and people have lived their lives committed to this journey, and Congress put us in these situations. Congress could have acted many times, especially in 1885 and 1956, to recognize us at those times. So we've been pursuing this through Congress ever since. And everything that we're doing now is geared towards that. As I stated before, I don't want to see my great-grandchildren having to do this 20, 30, 40 years from now. And going through the acknowledgement process usually takes about 20 years for a small tribe. And we're much larger than most tribes.
Yeah, and the irony, Mr. Chairman, that in 1989, the Interior Solicitor took the position that the tribe was not eligible for Part 83, the big process, because the tribe had been congressionally terminated by the 1956 Lumbee Act. So you're caught again in two situations. Subsequent Solicitor General reversed that opinion in 2016, but as we've seen by the history that you've gone through, another solicitor could flip right back to that previous position. And so I think the security for the tribe is what you're going through right now in terms of recognition. With the time I have left, Dr. Huxley, in your opinion, back to that point, why is the Department of Interior's federal recognition process not viable for the Lumbee tribe?
Well, I think the chairman stated it very well, that first of all, the tribe has been on this journey for a very long time. But secondly, it is bureaucratic and extensive, and it is slow, and it is an ineffective way of acting on this issue.
I think the validity is clear, and the authority of the Congress to federally recognize is clear. And like I said, you know, the changing positions, politically speaking, within Interior, has actually brought us to this situation at this point. And if it turns out that a recognition in Interior, however time it goes, is not supported by the administration, this administration, or a future one, we find ourselves in this situation again. This provides a validation 135 years later that should have been done a long time ago. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize Representative Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this hearing today and allowing these witnesses to come forward and give their testimony. This is a good day. Chairman Godwin, I think you would agree that this is indeed a good day. You've been here before. I've been here with you, but I really have hope this time that we're going to get this legislation to the finish line. This is a good day not just for the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, but it's a good day for what I'm going to call basic fairness. I introduced this bill back in April of this year on behalf of the tribe when there was a congressional vacancy in the 9th Congressional District. And so when Congressman Bishop, my friend now representing the 9th District, was first elected, one of the first things that he did after finding his office and finding where the restrooms were, one of the first things that he did was to reach out to me and talk with me about his support for the Lumbee tribe. And he told me then, and I remember, that he just didn't acquire this interest in the Lumbee tribe when he ran for Congress. He got involved with this issue when he was a state senator back in North Carolina. And so I want to thank him for coming today and thank him for his support as well. Mr. Chairman, this is a large tribe that is deserving of our support for federal recognition, and so I thank you for your willingness to help move this legislation forward. I've been sitting here today talking to the full chairman of the committee, and I have confidence that within the foreseeable future, there will be a markup of this legislation. And so I urge my colleagues to lend your support to these deserving Americans. It's a very, very important matter. Let me, in the time that I have remaining, ask you, Chief Sneed, I believe you're Chief Sneed. Is your title chief of your tribe?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this. Will federal recognition in any way have a financial impact on your tribe?
So federal recognition of a group this size would have an impact on every federally recognized tribe. As members of Congress are well aware, the budget for IHS and BIA generally is only increased by about 3% annually. IHS funding has never been fully funded. That number is reported to be fully funded would be about, I believe, $32 billion. I think this past fiscal year it's around $6 billion funded. And our position has always been the same. The process is there because of the fact that Congress has, first of all, a trust responsibility to those federally recognized tribes that exist already. And secondly, and equally as important, a fiduciary responsibility to the
So it does have a financial impact on your tribe. The answer is yes. Would that be
stated that
correct?
from the beginning, yes, sir.
It does have a financial impact. So it's not only about defending the identities of your ancestors, and while I recognize and stipulate that that's important, there's also a financial consideration in your opposition.
As I mentioned in my statement, it would have an impact on every federally recognized tribe. And where there are tribes, as the ones I mentioned in my statement, who live in abject poverty and don't have the resources to come before these subcommittees and be a voice, we are here to be their advocate as well.
And I want to thank you for acknowledging in your testimony earlier that Congress does, in fact, have jurisdiction of this matter. You think it's administratively preferred that the matter be handled by the Department of Interior, but you don't dispute that Congress has the authority to do this because 23 other tribes have been recognized by Congress. You don't dispute Congress's authority, do you?
No, sir.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I now recognize Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Cook, and members of the committee for allowing me to join your dais today. I appreciate that courtesy very much. Thank you for holding this hearing, and Representative Butterfield, and of course your co-sponsor, Representative Hudson. I appreciate both of you for introducing this important legislation. Thank you, Representative Butterfield, for acknowledging that I've only recently come. And as you say, as a state senator, I sponsored legislation to clarify the status of the Lumbee as a state-recognized tribe under North Carolina law. And the very first bill that I co-sponsored, as you noted, Representative Butterfield, as a member of Congress, is the bill before this subcommittee. It is a high priority for me, and to that end, I spoke this morning on the floor of the House in support. As the representative of North Carolina's 9th Congressional District, I'm proud to count all 55,000 members of the Lumbee tribe as my constituents. And Mr. Chairman, it's Robeson County, it is indeed, and it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to say that publicly. Fine people. The time is long past for the Lumbee tribe to enjoy full recognition. They trace their roots in North Carolina all the way back to 1725. Dr. Hoaxie, I haven't had the pleasure yet of reading the materials that you have submitted and those that have penned them, but I certainly will. But I will say this, I've been to Robeson County. I know the culture of the Lumbee. I've spent many occasions at UNC Pembroke. I know the history there. I've been to the Cultural Center. I've been to the Warriors Ball. I've been to Homecoming. I understand this is a cohesive, coherent culture that is shared by this Lumbee tribe. And, you know, the denial of recognition for this time is an unconscionable injury to the dignity of the Lumbee. And although whatever difficulties exist, the Congress must act with integrity in this matter and correcting injustices does not allow for difficulties, practical burdens to be balanced on the backs of the Lumbee tribe. So the Lumbee Recognition Act would provide the full recognition to which the Lumbee are entitled. And at long last, we must meet our nation's obligation to those good and decent people. I urge all members of this subcommittee to support its passage and indeed the House of Representatives. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank our panel for their insightful testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.